I'd now like to take a moment to introduce today's speaker, Dini Miller. Dini is going to present for about an hour, including questions with Mike. Then we will take a short break and return to hear her second presentation. We should have you off to your day by 10 a.m. I hope to meet many of you this weekend in Methuen at the bocce tournament. Even if you don't play, it's worth coming and hanging out with us for the food, drinks, and fun. Dr. Dini M. Miller is a professor at Virginia Tech and urban pest management specialist for Virginia. Internationally renowned in urban pest management, particularly in German cockroach and bedbug control, Dr. Miller has pioneered bedbug management plans and published early research on bedbug insecticide resistance. Her work trains professionals and property managers to make strategic pest management decisions, emphasizing assessment-based integrated pest management. Dr. Miller and her team conduct field and lab research on control methods for cockroaches, bedbugs, ants, and termites, aiming to guide effective pest management strategies. Dr. Miller earned her undergraduate degree from UCLA and her master's and PhD from the University of Florida, focusing on urban entomology. Her numerous awards include the Crown Leadership Award, HUD Healthy Housing Hero, and induction to the Pest Management Professional Hall of Fame. Welcome, Dini.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Okay, well, I guess we can go ahead and get started. So, one of the things I wanted to talk about today, and I'll give you the reason why here in just a few minutes, is about the different pest species of cockroaches that we have in the United States. And the reason I want to do that is so you can appreciate, first of all, the variety, where they come from, and some of the issues that we have to deal with them. And then, of course, we will be talking about control. And so, one of the first things I want to point out when looking at this global picture is that we have cockroaches on every single continent. Okay. Some of them initially were introduced from other continents, but even Antarctica, a lot of researchers like to say, oh, we don't have cockroaches in Antarctica. Well, no, we don't have any native species in Antarctica, but because of shipping on ships, quite literally, we have had plenty of cockroaches brought there because you might have heard there's a zillion research stations from different nations that are on Antarctica now. And guess who brought in German cockroaches? Researchers that were down there on their trip. And so they do have to kind of maintain some pest surveillance down in Antarctica in these different research stations. But it's just amazing to think that these pest cockroaches can get all over the world and are able to survive in all of these different environments. So please appreciate them and let other people know how great they are. Can you tell I like cockroaches? Okay, inexplicably, I'm not able to move my slide forward. I don't know why. Courtney, is this something you're able to do?
Doc, did you just touch down the bottom of the screen and see if you can then move it forward? Still not.
Oh, there we go. Okay, you're a genius. Thank you. Okay, realize that cockroaches are basically living fossils. They have not changed their morphology or shape or anything about them in millions of years. And so apparently they were just perfect from the time that they evolved. Now, the oldest fossils that we know of are about 280 million years old, and these were found in Japan. And you can see in that picture on the right, somebody's holding the hissing cockroach from Madagascar, but you can see that its body shape is pretty much the same as what you see embedded in that stone there. And also, if you look at the little white impression down at the bottom left, you can see how that kind of looks like the German cockroach. So overall, their body shape has just not changed over the millions of years that they have existed on this planet. Now, these guys, German cockroaches in general, were thought to have been associated with plants initially because they consume dead vegetation. And there are still a large number of cockroach species out there that are not pests that are known for consuming dead vegetation. So we think that that was originally the origin, and then the ones that ended up moving into the human environment did it because we provided them with so many treats. Okay, cockroach species numbers. So far as to what is described across the planet, and it doesn't mean that we have found every single cockroach species out there yet. There's about 4,500 described species. In the US, there are 70 species, but only 6 to 7 species are known to be really true pests of humans with worldwide distribution. Okay. And so that would be like the German cockroach, the American cockroach, to some degree now, the Turkestan cockroach. But we do have others that will occasionally invade, which we call paradomestic species that typically live outdoors. But if they have a human environment nearby, they will take advantage of that. And that kind of increases the pest numbers. But if you think about it, 4,500 described species worldwide, and only 6 or 7 of them are pests here, okay, with worldwide distribution also. That's not very many. So one thing that I find interesting is everybody that I speak to when I'm talking to lay people and what have you that aren't entomologists or in the pest control business, they think every cockroach is a pest that there is. And telling them that there's all these species out there that are never have been known to be a pest is always a surprise. So be sure to tell everybody that. So all of the true pest species, though, that we have here in the US originated in the old world. That's the Africa, Asia, the areas like that. And then basically were brought over to our continents on ships. Okay. And like I said, most species are not offensive. So take a look at the picture that you have there on the right. That's a nice looking animal. You have to admit that. And then here's another one. That's a beautiful animal too. Who wouldn't like an insect that looks like this? And that's not a pest species. And here's one that's a beautiful color. And this is the this is called the question mark cockroach, and it lives in India, but also another very interesting one. And you would never look at this and think, oh, well, that's a pest cockroach of some kind. No, they're a cockroach, but they live outdoors. And one thing that I think is very interesting, fairly recently, within the last 5 years, termites have now been identified using DNA analysis to be a subfamily of cockroaches. So termites are actually a social version of the cockroach. And there are quite a few cockroach species that have bacteria that live in their gut that help them digest wood and things like that. So that's very similar to what the termites have and things like that. But what's interesting is all of the researchers, when I was in at the University of Florida getting my master's and PhD, those who studied the termites thought they were better than those of us that studied the cockroaches because they had a more sophisticated animal. Now we can laugh at them and say, aha, termites are only cockroaches. There you go. Okay, cockroaches in humans. What evidence do we have about cockroaches being associated with primates in general? Well, even today, there's a lot of evidence of cockroaches living in orangutan nests that you might see in Indonesia and places like that. Ancestral species also have been found in mouse burrows. And then the pest species, the true pest species, like let's say the German cockroaches and what have you, are thought to have moved into the caves with humans, very much like bed bugs were. Bed bugs were actually there in the caves already. But here's the thing, like mice, and like the orangutans, humans provide cockroaches with food sources, sources of moisture, warmth, can protect them from different climate issues and things like that. So those cockroaches that came into like the human environment and found out what we could provide them with and how we could protect them have basically kind of stayed with us. And the German cockroach in particular is thought to have originated living in mouse burrows, but that might have been a little dangerous for the German cockroaches. Mice might eat them, particularly the young instars and things like that. But the mice did provide them with stored food and warmth. But when they moved into the caves with the humans, then we gave them everything: food, warmth, protection, moisture, things like that. And they didn't have to worry about us being predators and eating the cockroaches. At least I don't think so. I don't think that would taste very good. So we have a lot of historical records of cockroaches as pests, okay? So in ships in particular, try to imagine what it must have been like to be living on these ships in the 17, 16, 1800s, where these ships were known to be wildly infested with cockroaches. So Drake talks about it in 1634, Bly in 1792, Lewis in 1836 about cockroaches eating the skin and the fingernails of the various sailors. Because, of course, the cockroaches are on the ships looking for food and they'd be crawling all over all of those sailors during the night. Caudell in 1904 talks about the fact that he was traveling across Europe and found cockroaches in strawberries. The cockroaches were served to him a la carte in fried fish, and even cockroaches baked in a biscuit. And I don't know how many of you have traveled internationally, but I've been to Indonesia and quite a few places, and it's very interesting when you go to some of these marketplaces and you can see the occasional, not a whole bunch of them, but the occasional German cockroach crawling up on some of the pastries that are offered for purchase. Okay, in the 1900s, the Japanese had the best idea ever. So basically, they gave sailors shore leave if they caught 300 cockroaches. So this is what they started doing, is rewarding the sailors for eliminating the cockroach pests by giving them shore leave. So if you go and catch 300 roaches, yay, you get a day off, essentially. And I'm like, that was a brilliant idea. Now, airplanes, older planes, when they were first made, were made of glue and fibers, and the cockroaches were known to cause damage to these planes because that's what they would eat. If they got on airplanes and were stuck there, then they would start eating the glue, eating the fibers, and that, of course, made the plane itself a little, I don't know, delicate, to say the least. So that was kind of challenging. Okay, they are still an excellent pest species because, of course, they live well in the presence of humans, and they have just expanded their habitat with ours, especially the German cockroach and the brown-banded cockroach. They're easily transported over long distances, so we can just get them in cars and things like that. I've certainly seen cars infested with cockroaches. And exotic imports find it pretty easy to survive. So we now have the new Turkestan cockroach in the United States, and we are doing wonders with that one. It's doing great. These guys are typically generalist feeders and are willing to eat a bunch of different things, and that's what makes life easy for them, is whatever environment they're in, they can usually find something that they can consume. And then, of course, the rapid reproduction. German cockroaches, like you see in this cabinet here, the adult females are able to produce an egg case that can have 14 to 52 offspring in it. And she can produce a new egg case every 3 weeks. So that is quite rapid as far as reproduction goes. Okay, let's take a look at the different features of the cockroach. And this is important, especially when you're trying to identify them, is knowing these different parts of the body so you can look at them and see what type of cockroach they are. This is a hissing cockroach from Madagascar here. So one of the things I want to point out, you can see on the bottom that the head is completely hidden by the prothorax, okay? And when we say, any insect has three body parts, the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. But the prothorax, which is the first section of the thorax, pretty much covers the head. You can't really see the eyes unless you were going to flip this guy over, but you would be able to see the eyes, and the cockroach can see to get around. Now, I want to point out that prothorax, mesothorax, and metathorax is where the locomotion for cockroaches takes place. So the prothorax will have the first pair of legs, the mesothorax will have the second pair of legs, and the metathorax will have the third pair of legs. Now, with cockroaches that have wings, they all have four wings, two sets of wings. And the first set of wings will be attached to that mesothorax, and the second set to the metathorax on the winged species. Okay, then we have the abdomen. That's the third section of all insects. So head, thorax, and abdomen. And that is where all reproduction, digestion, excretion takes place. Okay. And one of the things I point out here, you see the cerci at the very back. These are these little tips that are little sensory organs. They actually sense air movement. The cerci are quite often used for identification purposes, and I'll show you an example of that in just a moment. So these are the cockroach features. These are the parts we look at when we're trying to identify them. Okay, I just want to point out here, you see this picture that came up that the cerci, unlike American cockroaches, can look quite different, and I'll talk about that specifically, but take a look at how tapered these are, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, I have people that come up to me quite frequently or call me and tell me they have found albino cockroaches in their house. Okay, make sure to clear that up for them. These are cockroaches that just recently molted. So they shed their skins, they come out, their new chitin exoskeleton on the outside of their body is soft. That's how they're able to get out of their old exoskeleton. And they will harden and darken over time. Okay. Because people live or work with cockroaches in their environment, many of them will witness cockroaches in the process of molting, but they don't necessarily know what it is. So please clear that up for them, because that is a myth. We do not have albino cockroaches. Okay, so we're going to get into the taxonomy of pest species. And so let me just talk to you about this a little bit. So these are from the order Dictyoptera, which includes the praying mantises, and they also go by Blatodia, which is a little bit more easily understood for people that we are just talking about cockroaches. Dictyoptera includes the mantids, but Blatodia does not. And we have three different families that we typically associate with the pest species out there. Okay. And these are based on the body shapes, different morphological features. So the first one is Blattellidae. And that is the family where we have the smaller cockroaches. This is the German cockroach, now the Asian cockroach, which is another pest that's recently come up, and then the brown-banded cockroach. They're small, so they're about less than an inch in length, and they are considered domestic cockroaches, not so much the Asian cockroach, but the brown-banded and the German cockroaches are domestic cockroaches because they only live in human environments. They are not part of the ecosystem. They're not out there contributing to the environment in any way. They have moved in with us, and they've been with us pretty much ever since, like bed bugs, and they are not interacting with any other animals typically. Okay, and then we have the Blattidae. That's our large cockroach pests. These are about 1.5 inches long or a little bit bigger. We call these paradomestic cockroaches because they typically live outdoors but can move indoors and live with humans. Okay, and then we have the Blaberidae. Blaberidae, these can vary in size and they can look very different too. So they can go from these, an inch long to much larger than that, about 8 centimeters. So that'd be about 3 inches long. Typically, they have short legs and they are wider in the body, and they can be paradomestic, especially those that will get into things like potted plants and stuff like that. And I'll give you some examples of those as we go through. Okay, let me point out that there are some differences in the biology of these different families. So they do all produce typically, when we think about the different cockroaches, we think about the egg cases they produce. And typically what we see in the Blattidae, okay, that's the larger cockroaches like American, Oriental, smoky brown, or smoky brown, and the brown cockroach, is that they will produce this egg capsule and basically drop it off. And they might cement it to a substrate in a protected area, but they basically will leave that egg case, and those immatures that hatch out of there are kind of on their own. Now, the Blattellidae, that's like the German cockroach and the brown banded cockroach, actually, the German cockroaches will carry their egg case on the body until it's about ready to hatch. Interesting though, the brown banded cockroach, what they do is they will actually lay their egg cases together and they will be attached to a surface. But multiple females will place their egg cases in the same location. Now, how they communicate with each other to do that, we don't know. We have no idea. But you can go into a home and see 4 or 5 of these egg cases all there together. Now, when we get into the Blaberidae, then things get interesting. These do not produce egg cases. Actually, the embryos are produced in the female's body, and it's hard to see it here, but those embryos, you've got 2 of them that you're looking at that are facing each other. And where you see those little creases is another set of 2, and another set of 2, and another set of 2. So you've got this long kind of string of embryos. Well, during their development process, the female will actually extrude those from her body and then pull them back into a different part of her body that's closer to her back. And that is called a brood chamber. And they will live there and develop until they hatch live. So it's not like she's dropping off an egg case anywhere. These are live cockroaches that will actually come out of her body at the time of hatch, not really hatch. Okay. So it's very different how they produce these different egg cases and embryos and what they do with them. Okay. So why am I interested in introducing you to all these different cockroaches? Here is the reason, and I'm not joking. I got a call from a military housing facility that was out in Yuma, Arizona. And this is a housing facility that had families that had somebody was in the military, and they had a chronic cockroach problem. And they had called a company to come out and tell them what kind of issue they had and what to do about it. And what I want to point out to you is here is what was written in their formal report. Okay. Per your findings, we were able to identify the insect as baby sewer roaches. Okay, is there any cockroach species known as a sewer roach? No, there is not. Do we call them babies? No, it's an immature cockroach of some kind. And then it goes on to say the following is the procedure and proper control methods for the above mentioned address. Well, how could you guarantee anybody that you're going to give them proper control methods when you can't even identify the species? So I want to tell all of us that are everybody here today that if you want to be known as a professional in your business, please do not make up names for the insects you are working on. Okay? Make sure you're an expert. You can know the names of all of these cockroaches, no problem. You have the power So that's the reason I wanted to go over these different pest species today so that you could appreciate how many there are and the different varieties, how to tell the difference between one and another, and then we will discuss the control methods. But please make sure that you're accurate in what you are describing when you see it in somebody's home, okay? So let's start here with the blatted family. These are the paradomestic species that typically will live outdoors but will come in. And of course, we've got to start with the American cockroach because the elections. So here we have the American cockroach, not from the United States at all. Again, it was from Asia, old world species, but brought over in ships. These are large, usually about 2.5 inches. They can, if you get a really big one, they have a worldwide distribution because humans have taken them all over the world. But tropical Africa was the original origin. So they are old world species. But of course, Africa and Asia is the one where most all of our species have come from. These live outdoors but can invade. And they've been associated with ships, sewers, steam tunnels. I'm sure all of you have seen that. They are oviparous, which means they produce an egg case, and then they cement that egg case onto a substrate with their saliva, and they're like, okay, good luck, see ya. And basically, the embryos will develop inside that egg case, and then the pressure of the embryos inside the egg case will eventually open it up, and they're able to come out. Now, these guys, depending on where you live in the United States, can fly. Okay. So it's very interesting. I live in Virginia now, and our American cockroaches do not fly. I'm from California, San Diego, and the cockroaches never were known to fly out there. But when I went to Florida to get my graduate degree, you could be sitting outside on a restaurant and have one of them hit you in the cheek. So they fly, but not very well. And it seems to be different in different locations. So this is one of those species that people will tell you, though, are palmetto bugs. And let me say, that's a generic term that kind of came from Florida, where they have palmetto palms. And a lot of these larger reddish brown cockroaches that can sort of fly come from those palmetto palms because they will breed in the bracts of the palms. So they've gotten that name. But that is just a nickname for big brown and kind of flies, basically, for cockroaches, but know how to tell the difference. Okay, how do you tell that a cockroach is an American cockroach? Remember, I talked about those cerci. If you look at those cerci down in the bottom right there, you can see how they are tapered. And that is very important because that tapered cerci is really what, oops, I'm so sorry, is really what identifies them. And you can kind of see it in the upper picture as well. That cerci is thicker at the base and then tapers off at the end. And I'll be able to show you some other photographs of different species and you'll see how different they look. So this genus species name is Paraplaneta americana, and that is the American cockroach. Okay, another palmetto bug is Paraplaneta fuliginosa. And you in up in the northeastern part of the United States, you might not see this one very often, but if you go to Florida, you'll definitely see it. This is the smoky brown cockroach. So take a look at that cerci right there and how much thicker and more blunt it is. Okay. And these are subtropical, mostly located in the southern US here. They live outside in tree holes and landscaping. Okay, these are also a native species as far as we know. They might have been imported, but there's no record for it, and they haven't really been found anyplace else. We find these typically inside attics in heated buildings if they come inside. They are brownish black in color, slightly smaller than the American cockroach, but you can tell it looks quite a bit different. And again, you can see those blunt cerci, and here you have pictures of an egg case hatching. And that looks pretty much the same when we see American cockroaches hatch. So isn't that amazing? Okay, and then one that looks very much like the American cockroach is the Australian cockroach. And again, originally from Southern Asia, not from Australia. So its name is Paraplaneta australasiae. So originally from Southern Asia, second most important pest in the southern states of the US. Okay, lives in landscaping, mulch, greenhouses, but also can get into homes, no question, flies poorly, has difficulty surviving in cold temperatures. So we don't really see this insect beyond North Carolina, if it's even that far north. So it really isn't, oops. Is this the poll that you're setting up for me?
Yep,
What is your,
this is the first poll, so if everyone can please fill out the poll just to mark your attendance, then we can continue the program. Sorry to
oh,
interrupt
okay.
you.
Do I need to put my favorite holiday in there too?
You're more than welcome to.
Oh, well, I guess I will do that.
We can't vote.
Okay, so can I continue?
Yeah.
Okay, so these aren't established far north of South Carolina. Now, when I wrote this originally, I say far north of South Carolina, so they do kind of border into North Carolina, but that's about as far as they go. Now, I want to point out, first of all, the blunt cerci, hard to kind of see them in these pictures, in this picture, but the cerci are blunt. Also, I want you to look at that prothorax and see that it has the Batman symbol on it. Now, it looks similar to the American cockroach, but the thing about the American cockroach, it has darker spots on the prothorax, but it does not look like a Batman symbol. It's not clear enough. And that's the way you can tell the difference. The Australian cockroach, there's no question, that's a Batman symbol. Okay, the other thing to point out here is notice on the edges of the wings, those yellow streaks. That is also a characteristic of the Australian cockroach specifically. So that's what I want to point out to you here is those yellow streaks on the shoulders really give it away as being an Australian cockroach and not an American. Oops, I don't know what happened. Can you still see my screen? I
Yeah, we can
can't.
still see your screen.
I can't.
Do you want to try unsharing and resharing?
I don't know what happened. I tried to change the slides and, oh, here we go. Okay, maybe. There we go. Okay,
Are you
let's
okay?
try it now.
Perfect.
Nope, won't let me change slides now.
Here, I'm gonna stop sharing your screen.
Oh, there we go. Okay,
Okay.
now it's working. Okay, what I want to point out on this one is this again is the Australian cockroach, and it's another one that goes by that term palmetto bug. But look at the immature Australian cockroach. Now, it does not have the full wings. Like all other cockroaches, it really doesn't develop the wings until it molts into the adult life stage and becomes a reproductive. But here you can see it before it has developed wings. And look at all those yellow spots down the side. You must admit that is a beautiful animal right there. Okay, another blatted that is an indoor-outdoor occasional invader is the Paraplaneta brunea. This is also known as a palmetto bug, but it's truly the brown cockroach, as you can see. Now, it kind of has the tapered cerci at the back, but you'll notice they're much thicker than we would expect on the American as well. Now, this one is from Africa. And it was, of course, transported by commerce on ships, found mainly in the southern states, but can be as far north as Pennsylvania. Okay. And it's in the greenhouses at Virginia Tech, right here at my university. We've got that brown cockroach everywhere. And its habitats are very similar to what we would expect for the American cockroach. So you can have these as occasional invaders into homes. They do live in sewer areas. Like if you take off the manhole cover in certain locations, you can find brown cockroaches in there. And like I said, greenhouses, things like that, because that's where the food and the moisture is located. Okay, and then we have the Florida woods roach. This is unique to Florida. Notice this one only has wing pads, does not have true wings. And these are a Caribbean species, basically a tropical American species now, West Indian, but also the Florida woods roach, is a native to Florida, and it goes by the name Uracotis floridana, and it does come indoors periodically. They will breed outdoors, but often breed in landscaping and mulch around the homes. And then that is what allows them to invade occasionally. Usually you don't get large numbers of these guys coming in, but because of their size and everything, people just freak out when they come in the house. And if they try and do anything to get rid of them, they have this horrible smell when they're disturbed. So this is one of the problems. If you try and smash it or you try and spray it, you're going to have this nasty cockroach smell. And this is kind of the origin of that name palmetto bug, because these guys truly are palmetto bugs. They actually lived in palmetto palms. But again, you can see the egg capsules that they produce, and they drop those off. They're cemented to substrate as well, but you can see the size of those egg capsules are just huge. So this is a pretty big animal. It's usually about 2 inches or so, and pretty broad too. Okay, another blattidae that all of you should be familiar with, Blatta orientalis. This is the Oriental cockroach, and it's not from the Orient, it's from North Africa. Okay, and these guys prefer lower temperatures. They're mainly outdoors in cool, moist locations. Now, when I was a little girl living in San Diego, we had a water meter outside in the front yard, and at night, all of the Oriental cockroaches would come out of that water meter. So that's where they hung out basically during the day. And of course, we've seen plenty of them here in Virginia in people's basements and things like that. So basements, crawl spaces, lawns, and the adult males have these short wings, like that one that you could see on the top. A lot of people will call these guys the water bug. But that's the adult male with the short wings. And notice that the female, though, only has wing pads, no true wings at all. And these are smaller than the American cockroach and usually very, very dark brown or black in color. Okay, then here's one of the newer ones that's kind of a new pest that's getting a lot of, I don't know, a lot of attention. This Blatta lateralis. This is the Turkestan cockroach, and it's a new invader from Asia. Now, it's been in California since 1978, but then found in Los Angeles in 2005, and people started freaking out because large numbers of these are starting to show up. These live outdoors in moist areas, typically under rocks or leaves within the Sonoran Desert, and then will invade homes because they're looking for water. Now, one of the things that people are saying, I don't know where they're getting these numbers from, but these are researchers are claiming that they are replacing the Oriental cockroach and taking up their habitats. Now, originally it was thought, after some of the wars that went on in the Middle East, that when the US started bringing equipment and vehicles back from the Middle East, that they brought this species in on those vehicles. However, one of the things we've really seen is that these guys are being produced by pet stores for reptile food. And we think that this may be the reason for this new infestation of this particular species. People can buy bags of cockroaches to feed to their reptiles. And let's say they feed half of them and then they don't feed the rest to the reptiles or whatever and dump the other half out in the yard or something like that. And then you can get a population started that way. And that would kind of explain the distribution of these guys in a lot of the southwestern states. So it's just interesting, but this one is becoming a new pest that is an occasional invader. And you can see that the males and the females, again, look very different. The males have a full set of wings and the females only have the wing pads. But just be aware, Turkestan cockroach, a new pest, and who knows where they will end up, because again, they're non-native to the United States, so they can probably be released anywhere. Okay, getting into the Blattellidae, these are the smaller cockroach. So we have Supelpa longipalpa, Supella longipalpa. These are the brown-banded cockroaches. I had never seen these in real life until I got here to Virginia, and I walked into the new laboratory after I was hired and walked in there, and here was one of these clusters of egg cases right on the wall, and I knew exactly what it was. I was very thrilled to see it, but one of the other professors who was with me wasn't that interested. So they came from Africa. They have no wild populations. They basically evolved with humans as well. Attach egg cases to ceilings and picture frames and electrical conduits so they can be anywhere in the home. Found throughout the house, near ceilings and in warm, dry locations. And Price Hall is the name of the hall where our laboratory originally was. What's interesting that's different about these guys from the German cockroaches is we expect to find German cockroaches usually in the kitchens and bathrooms because of the moisture there. And these guys do not have a thing for moisture. So this is why we see them near ceilings in these warmer, drier locations. So we usually find them about 3/4 of the way up walls and things like that in people's homes, because that's where they tend to aggregate. Interesting biology and behavior for these guys. And of course, our favorite, the German cockroach, and originated from Africa, single most important household pest across the world. No known wild populations at all. They do not fly. The females will carry the egg case until hatch. And what's interesting about that is not all of them will carry the egg case until it starts hatching, but they will carry it for a pretty long time until it's very near hatching. That female does not eat very much while she's carrying the egg case. So she's really hungry when that egg case hatches. So guess what she eats? About 25% of her offspring. And we like to say that German cockroaches, because the female carries her egg case around, shows parental care. But I'm like, parental care when she eats 25% of them? I don't know. That's questionable, mother. So they don't fly, carries the egg case, typically found in the kitchen and bathroom areas due to their strict moisture requirements. So most of us know that we find them associated with kitchens and bathrooms, but certainly in the infested places we work in, we can find them anywhere. And I'll be talking about that in my next presentation. Okay, one that looks exactly like the German cockroach, Blatella acini, and that is the Asian cockroach. The wings on the adults are typically a little bit longer relative to the body than the German cockroaches, but that's the only difference really that you can see very easily. It's very hard to tell them apart unless you have a key for them right there. But their behavior looks totally different. They live outdoors and they fly. At night, they're attracted to lights, and they got established in Virginia in some of these orange juicing plants. So they were associated typically with the pulp and the leftover orange rinds after the juice had been extracted, and they'd make these giant piles of these rinds and everything outside of these factories. And these guys got established in there because, yay, juice had plenty of sugar and moisture and things like that. And the problem is these were out in rural locations in Florida. And if you've ever been down to Florida and drive around some of these rural locations, they'll have small hotels by the side of the road and things, and people would go and get a hotel room, and these Asian cockroaches would be flying around because of the lights there at the hotel, and people would go into their hotel room, and the Asian cockroaches might fly in and follow them, and people would just freak out thinking that these were German cockroaches flying in, but no, they were Asian cockroaches, and they're spreading. When I lived in Florida at first, I was at Gainesville, Florida, and never had seen the Asian cockroach. But by the time I was graduating with my PhD 6 years later, yes, I had a bunch of them that were on the front door of my apartment. Okay, another pest-ish species, Parcoblatta pennsylvanica. That's the wood cockroach. typically found throughout the United States, invades homes if you live in the woods, okay? Lives in the hollow trees under the bark, can withstand cold temperatures and things like that. But here's the thing is that occasionally they will come in and people freak out because they are a cockroach but they're not really a human pest. And then we have the blabarids. Okay, these are some of my favorites because these are just the most unusual types of cockroaches out there. And they're not really pests, but they are occasional invaders. And that's what makes people crazy. So here we have the Suriname cockroach, Hypnocellus surinamensis. Okay, and again, these retain the embryos inside the body. And this particular species is parthenogenetic in North America, meaning they don't have to have males to be able to reproduce. So these females can just keep producing eggs. But they are a native of Suriname, typically found in tropical locations. But I will tell you, one of the infestations that I have seen was at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. They had a display of marmoset monkeys that were behind these glass panes, and there was like a tree that the monkeys are climbing on, and then there was soil on the bottom, so that's where the tree was planted essentially. But that soil you could see through the glass panes about this deep. And all up against those glass panes were just hundreds and hundreds of Suriname roaches pressed against the glass underneath this soil. So somehow or other, these got imported into the soil that were at the zoo there, and they burrow in soil. So one of the problems that we have with those, if you live in a location where these exist, they've been imported, and you keep plants in pots outside, you can get the Suriname cockroaches crawling into those plants. Then let's say you bring them inside because it gets cold or something like that, and then they start to dry out, lose the moisture, and then the Suriname cockroaches start crawling out. And that's usually when people freak. Okay. So they can be a pest, but only in that way. And then here we have the Cuban cockroach. Look at this beautiful animal, Panchlora nivea. Okay, these guys live outdoors. Their origin is from the Caribbean. They're typically attracted to lights at night, and that's when they come indoors is accidentally, but that's only the adults because only the adults can fly. The adults are green and have wings. Nymphs are brown and wingless. And like I said, they do fly, but not that they're better flyers than most of the cockroaches we're used to, but they're still not great flyers in my opinion. And again, the female retains the embryos in a brood chamber in her body. But she's beautiful. How do you find that one offensive? Gotta like that one. Okay, so let's talk about the human health and cockroach control, because I just talked to a lady yesterday on the phone because I have a large extension appointment. Anybody can call me. And she was just freaking out about having a cockroach in her home, and she doesn't know what kind it is. She did call a pest control company. They didn't necessarily identify it. They said it might be an American. And she was worried about being at this home where her mother lives and that her mother might pick up a disease from having cockroaches. Okay, so let's talk about what we do about cockroaches. Well, one of the things I run into when I'm talking to most humans is like, you've got to spray them, right? We need to have the right spray. We have to spray. We're not spraying enough. We need to spray more. And yes, everybody's used to spraying. When you say insect pest, they think all we're going to do is spray and that there's some miracle spray out there. But one of the problems we've run into with domestic cockroaches is the resistance has gotten so ridiculous that baits are about the only thing that works. However, for a lot of these paradomestic species, the sprays still will kill them. But again, you have to spray each one. Why not smack them with a hammer? How about that? Okay, pest cockroaches usually associated with public health because they cause stress It's so funny. I concluded biting in here because people will tell me, oh, they bite. But no, they don't have mouth parts that are strong enough to penetrate skin, but they can grab hold of you, certain species. But that's about it. Body invasion, that's a bigger problem, especially with children, getting in the ears of children when they're asleep, things like that, getting in up the nose. I've dealt with that one time. Their odors, definitely I've been into different restaurants where I can go, pick up a glass, smell it. Oh, Americans, you know. Contamination, of course, because of the feces. They're prolific with all of their feces. Potential for disease transmission. We'll talk about that. They are not known to have, there isn't documentation of cockroaches really transmitting disease. Can they carry pathogens on their body? Yes, but so can children. Okay. And cockroaches really don't have anything on them that isn't already in the house unless you're crawling around in the sewer with them. The biggest number one health issue associated with cockroaches is associated with the German cockroach. And of course, that's asthma and allergies. But cockroaches, a lot of them are associated with filth. You know, Oriental cockroaches are associated with sewers, and then they also invade hospitals. That's not a place that we would want cockroaches crawling around on people. American cockroaches are common pests of manholes, sewers, and also animal rearing facilities. So they have the potential to contaminate other animals. German cockroaches are the most common pests of homes. We do see them in animal rearing facilities, and of course, they're in hospitals and things like that. Brown and smoky brown cockroaches are common pests in privies or outdoor toilets. So we don't want those guys coming in because who knows what they're going to bring with them. Okay, bacteria associated with cockroaches from sewers and hospitals and homes. So we have Staphylococcus, which are known to be carried by Oriental and German cockroaches, E. coli. That can be carried by anything, but Oriental and German cockroaches are what it's been investigated in. Salmonella, so Americans and Germans, Shigella, Oriental and Americans, leprosy, Australians, Americans, and Germans, right? You know, like leprosy. Yes, now think about what we talked about with the Australians, Americans, and Germans, all kind of coming from old world, Middle East, Asia, Africa locations. Then we have typhoid, Oriental cockroach, bubonic plague, Oriental cockroach, and I'm sure any of the common pathogens that anybody would have here in the US, if they've got a cockroach infestation in their home, those cockroaches are probably carrying those around. Okay, other pathogens like hookworms. Oh, yuck. You know, they can transmit from their bodies mechanical from their feces or their saliva. Okay, so from their bodies, if you touch these cockroaches, yes, you may pick up some of these worms or other pathogens, but also their feces and saliva. They're known to have 4 different strains of the polio virus have been associated with cockroaches. Amoebic dysentery, which causes intestinal infections. Helminths, which are parasitic worms. Hookworms, and you can see the picture of if you get infested with hookworms, this is you out walking and getting your feet in contact with feces and things like that, where the hookworms are inside the feces, and they can get into abrasions in your skin. So let's say you got little cuts or something in your skin, then that allows the worms in their developmental stage to actually get in there and develop inside you. Ugh, intestinal blood feeders, they're not nice. Roundworms, and you will get this from consuming the eggs of roundworms in food. And then you develop diarrhea and stuff like that. And of course, tapeworms. And all of these pathogens can remain viable for days and weeks inside the cockroach. And that's where the fear of picking those up can come from. If you have a lot of cockroaches in your environment, then you can run into these other pathogens. Okay. Now, that being said, okay, pest cockroaches favor environments that are created for the discharge of effluent and waste disposal. They also favor kitchens and locations where food is prepared. That sounds bad. Okay. And the cockroaches carry pathogens inside and on their bodies that are viable for days or weeks. But here is the thing: cockroaches have never been credited with a human disease outbreak. Okay. People like to talk about that, but it's never been known for them to do that. And at this point, the cockroaches can only be regarded with suspicion. So let people know this who want to be afraid. Okay, there's only been a few cases of disease transmission that have been credited to cockroaches, but they don't have the data to support it. And all of them have taken place outside the US. Now, although cockroaches would be great agents of disease transmission, they're not nearly the threat to human health like houseflies or mosquitoes. And we don't have any evidence, any case evidence of actual disease transmission in the US. Okay, there is a threat. So that does warrant control measures, but we don't have any data to really support that. Now, I do want to talk about in the former Soviet Union, they had infestations of cockroaches in hospitals, and people would end up, because they had open wounds and things like that, with infections that they thought the cockroaches had caused, because cockroaches would crawl on one patient, pick up maybe whatever they had, and then crawl on another patient and drop that off. But that is the only known situation where they thought cockroaches were responsible for transmitting infectious pathogens, but they don't have any data to support it. It's still a story. It was not tested. So, but regardless, they have the ability to transmit different things on their bodies in particular, and to carry these pathogens in their gut so they can poop them out. And we all know that they poop everywhere. So we have to think about cockroach control. So for chemicals, we have sprays, we have fogs. I don't know if any of you are using fogs anymore, but I still run into a zillion apartment renters that use fogs all the time. Dusts, insect growth regulators, baits, and of course, fumigation. Then we have the non-chemical, the monitoring with traps, exclusion, sanitation, vacuums, biological controls, and then I'll talk about some things that are being sold out there that don't work, and then mechanical control. So realize many of these cockroaches are brought in, and some are periodical invaders. So take a look at these German cockroach situations. This isn't a home we were working in. Used furniture can have egg cases in them. I had a situation when I lived in Florida where my roommate was rearing American cockroaches in her bedroom, and that was just kind of, she didn't do it intentionally, but that was what was going on. So let's talk about monitoring. And we like to use monitors, basically sticky traps, for identification and determination of where the populations are focused. Okay, another thing that's very important is using monitors to determine the population density, and also to monitor after treatment to see how well the treatment worked. And that is very, very important. I go into a lot of apartments that are under contracts where they have sticky traps in various locations, but they're not coming back to check them for like 3 months. And we go in there and check them overnight. And what you see in that picture down at the bottom is overnight trap catch. So some of these places, getting an assessment of the population density alone is just very, very important. And of course, it helps you identify what the problem is. Exclusion, very important. If you know that they have paradomestic cockroaches coming in, or typical non-pest species that are just invading, occasional invaders, this eliminates the ability of the cockroaches to travel from one location to another inside a building. First of all, that's very important. It's difficult to keep some paradomestic species out because of the structural condition. I was working in a single wide trailer home that just had holes all over it, and it made it so easy for American cockroaches to just get in there from various locations around the home. Most cockroaches, though, are transported in, from warehouses, people, belongings. And just as an example, my fiance, when I was in grad school, we had to go to his mother's house for dinner every Friday night. And I was working in a cockroach lab. And one night I'm sitting at the table and my purse is sitting down next to me and I see a German cockroach crawling up the wall. And I had to smash it and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, that's mine," because I knew it had come from my purse. So it's easy enough to bring them in. And then we've got to think of ways of excluding them. But then if you look at certain locations, this is a place I was working in Malaysia. Okay. And you see all of these open windows and everything, and you see all the antennas coming out of the windows and stuff because there's no screens or anything. They have a species there called the harlequin cockroach that you can see in that top jar on the left. And that is a home invader in Malaysia. But you can also see that they have plenty of American cockroaches. And when doing exclusion, you really have to think, okay, am I going to be able to exclude cockroaches from all these locations? Now, just for fun, take a look down this hallway of this apartment complex here. And you can see the different doorways. Well, here's one thing that they had done. Do you see above the doorway there where that gate is, that they had all of this open space where basically you could pass notes to somebody inside that apartment without going in it. And certainly the cockroaches or anything else use that as a pathway to get in. How would you exclude doing that? You'd have to screen everything, and that would not be very pretty. So there's some challenges. And also notice here the plumbing penetrations in one of the bathrooms. And that was, of course, connected right next to the kitchen, which you can see on the other side here. And the cockroaches were allowed to go from one spot to another. So again, we have to get clever when we're talking about exclusion. And of course, everybody emphasizes sanitation. And poor sanitation does provide numerous sources of food, moisture, and harborage and stuff. Clutter is the domestic cockroach's best friend because it really hinders our ability to access all of these individuals. So if people have a ton of stuff, it's really hard for us to get to each and every cockroach because it provides so many harborage locations. Now, I will say, because you'll see in my next presentation, poor sanitation doesn't hinder baiting at all as much as we had previously thought. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So this is a great place to put baits because we can't really put anything else in there. And again, poor sanitation really hinders spray applications. If you're trying to do spray applications in an apartment like this, even if they had cleaned up all the dishes and everything, the amount of clutter, you just can't get access to the cockroaches and all these different surfaces. So I've been preaching the gel bait application, and like you see in the middle picture there, using the bait tacos, which I'll talk about next. But gel bait applications, at least we can place in a lot of different locations, and the cockroaches can get access to it, whether people clean or not. Okay, one thing I want to ask all of you as a personal favor to me, if you're making these gel bait applications using bait tacos, don't just leave them there for the rest of eternity, okay? I've seen a lot of gel bait applications in cracks and crevices that were made in 1998. Okay, we need to clean that stuff up, okay? Just do our residents a favor. Okay, vacuuming. I use this after baiting because we want to get rid of all of the dead cockroaches, their feces, their cast skins, and their egg cases. So let's kill them off first and then vacuum everything up. And this again, hopefully can reduce the overall allergen load. So look at all these guys, look at all those feces and cockroaches. Okay, dust. We found dust to be very helpful. Boric acid dust has to be consumed, so we want to make sure that we put it out in a light enough application that the cockroaches are willing to walk through it, get it on their body, and then groom themselves and end up ingesting it. Insecticidal dust, that's where the active ingredient is placed on inert particles. And again, that's kind of a little bit more difficult because we're looking at those active ingredients getting inside the body from the dust that's on the outside of the body.
You need 5 minutes.
Yes.
5 more minutes for the session.
Okay. And then we have desiccant dust, which typically kills them by dehydration. Again, we need to have this applied in a very light way so that the cockroaches are willing to walk into it and pick it up. And of course, what we see the residents doing, and I've also seen some pest control applications like this, where the dust has just been applied in this really thick layer. And the cockroaches would have to be stupid to go and throw themselves in there. They're usually repelled by a lot of that stuff. So here you can see some of the dust applications that I have seen out there in the field. Okay, insect growth regulators. Have you ever seen 14 Gentrol point source devices under a stove? I certainly have. If you go into apartments and you pull that stove out and they've had a long-term contract with a pest control company, there'll be just so many point sources under there. And we just don't know if it's doing any good at that point. But the way that insect growth regulators are supposed to work, and make sure you tell your residents this, is we have two different methodologies. We have what's called the JHA, or juvenile hormone analogs, which disrupts the juvenile's hormones so they die prior to molting into adults. And frequently, though, they can still molt to the adult stage, but then they will have twisted wings, they have deformed genitalia, and they are sterile. Okay. Can affect adults by reducing female egg production also. So typically we think of using juvenile hormone analogs for immature cockroaches to either kill them at their final molt or to make sure that they're damaged enough and deformed that they don't reproduce. But again, we can affect the adults somewhat. It will reduce the female egg production, but not necessarily eliminate it. But the idea is since they produce these egg cases, if there's too few offspring in there, they can't get it open when it's time to hatch and they're kind of stuck. The other type is chitin synthesis inhibitors, or CSIs, and that inhibits the ability of the nymphs to produce chitin, so they die during the molting process. And we're now seeing insect growth regulators being brought into spray formulations and also formulated in baits so that we kind of have dual effects by some of these different methodologies. Now, different things that have been tried have been biological controls with nematodes. So they basically made a bait station that had these nematode worms in there, and the cockroaches would enter and become infected with the nematodes, and then theoretically would go back to their aggregations and pass those nematodes on to other members of the colony, but that didn't really work. So that product went away in about 1997. Fungus, also, they looked at Bavaria bassiana, which is what we're using on bed bugs and things like that. Dr. Jerry Steinbeck at the University of Florida is the one who came up with the product. Again, they were supposed to go into like a bait station, pick up the fungus, take that back, transfer it to others. And unfortunately, that did not work the way that we had thought. Parasitic wasps. Yes, these work. Wasps from several families are very good at laying their eggs. Basically, they take their stinger, stab the cockroach egg case, then lay eggs of baby wasps in there inside the ootheca, and then the larvae eat the cockroach embryos, and then the wasps emerge as adults. Okay, and that worked really well. The only problem is convincing humans to allow us to release wasps in their apartment. So that didn't really come out to be a practical method. Okay, what doesn't work? Mechanical controls. Oh, these electromagnetic wave technologies. They're supposed to produce these waves that will repel mice and cockroaches by disturbing their nervous systems. And no one has found any of these to work. Okay. So it's, what is it? They're supposed to even show hysterical behavior, convulsions, and make them lose their reproductive capacity. And one of the things we've seen in different homes we've gone into that had these devices is because they're warm and plugged into the wall, we'll have German cockroaches living right behind them, using that as a harborage area. Okay, mechanical control. Here's something that works. Okay. In Japan, they have the swatting slippers. So you can wear these slippers, and if you run into a cockroach, you take it off and whack the cockroach. And that works. Okay, last slide here. Which cockroach would you rather see in your home? Oriental cockroach or German cockroach? And that's it for this presentation, sir. I hope, Mike, am I on time?
You are exactly on time.
Okay.
I think this was very enlightening, all the different species, and I think a lot of us have seen many of these. I have personally seen the Australian, the Suriname, the brown banded, obviously the Oriental, American, and obviously everybody's seen the German roach.
Yeah.
I know I've come in contact with every one of them over my career. Not positive about the Asian. I'm not positive if I've come across that one yet. I did years ago I did get a Cuban death head cockroach.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I did have one of them. I caught one of them, had no idea what it was, had to bring it to the extension service to find out what it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah. Well, the Turkestan one is a new one to look for.
Yep.
And especially anybody who's with us today, if you go and travel and things like that, and you like to look at bugs out of curiosity, that is a new one to look for because that's showing up in a lot of different locations.
Looking to see what we have. A lot of people are putting DM01 on the questions, and I don't know what that is. That must be the slide. Nope.
Oh, I'm sorry for your set. Yes, that's what I have on my last slide. To earn credit for this session, please enter the following.
Okay. So basically you want them to enter which one they would rather have. What they would rather see. That's neither, but if I had to take one, I'd probably want the Oriental.
Yeah, I think I would too.
A little easier to control.
Yep.
Yeah, you had one that I sent you an IM on that, which was I can't remember which one it was back in there, but it looked very similar. Then the next slide was the Oriental.
Mm-hmm. An IM. I don't know what that is. A message?
Yeah. Daniel's everybody put DM 101. Yeah. German. All right, some of the guys got it now. They understand what it is. I have somebody here. I am having an issue with some infestations, German roaches not accepting bait. I tried different types, recommendations, use bait taco method as well.
Take a look at it. Use again, the cut right wax paper turned out to be critical for us because it's used for baking, and that's what we make the tacos. We are seeing bait aversion out there, so it is very important that you try different bait formulations because we have selected for certain cockroach species that will not eat glucose if that is the primary sugar in the bait formulation. So try some different ones that have different sugars in there. Very important because what was it? Invicta that we had tried out in the field, and we found out that during COVID, the pest control operators who worked for Richmond Public Housing had been using that one, what was it? Yeah, the MGK Invict or Vendetta Nitro. I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking about. The Vendetta Nitro, and they had been using it for the last couple of years in all the units that they worked in. And I actually made 11 bait tacos. I had like a 4th instar German cockroach come out and go to one taco and reject it, go to another, go to another, go to another, go to another. Wouldn't eat from any of them, but kept checking them out to see if they were food. And that lets me know that there's some beta version out there. So just be aware of this. We need to rotate our products, both the active ingredient and the inert ingredients, as much as possible.
I have a question. Are juvenile hormone IGRs more or less effective than the chitin synthesis IGRs against German roaches?
Well, I think because the juvenile hormone analogs have been used the longest, if you're going to use genital point sources and things like that, and this is one study we're going to look at to see if there is any kind of resistance developing, but we see the chitin synthesis inhibitors, and this is just my point of view out in the field. The chitin synthesis inhibitors seem to be working a little bit better right now. This second section, we're going to be focusing on German cockroach control and some of the work that I have been doing in low-income housing. And that kind of introduced this methodology. Somebody had already brought up the question of the bait tacos. So this is talking about the bait tacos here. So this might not be new to some of you, but hopefully new to others. And I made the title of this, Why We Need Pest Control, Not Pesticide Application Only. And I'm making a case for assessment-based pest management. And integrated pest management has been a phrase we've used for a long time. And I'm going to talk to you about the origin of that phrase and why I think for the urban environment, we need to change it to assessment-based pest management. And I just wanted you to take a look at this windowsill here. This is in Richmond Public Housing, a U.S. HUD facility. They have been under contract for years. And I just want to point out the number of German cockroach egg cases in this windowsill. There's over 17 egg cases in there. And again, each one of those egg cases has 14 to 52 offspring in it. And I have to ask you, do cockroaches like brightly lit locations? Is that why there's so many egg cases in this windowsill? Or is it just that all of the good cockroach hiding places are already full? And that tells you this is a place that is under contract for pest control, but it is just still loaded with German cockroaches. And why would that be? Okay, well, let's talk about the origin of integrated pest management just to get it to the point of why I think this name should be changed for us that work in the urban environment. So in the 1950s, what happened was there was a discussion of the overdependence on pesticides after World War II, which led to insecticide resistance among these pest populations that were in agricultural locations. Okay, so this all started with an origin in agriculture. And because of this resistance, they didn't have any natural enemies anymore because any of the natural enemies had been killed by the insecticide. So these resistant insects, now they had no effective way of dealing with them. And that's because they had been basically applying DDT on a calendar-based basis because it was easy to go and do, and then ended up with this problem that they weren't killing pests anymore, but they had eliminated anything that would kill the pests for them. Well, of course, and then in the 1960s, Rachel Carson publishes Silent Spring, and the public becomes alerted to the problems with DDT and other pesticides, and that gets everybody freaked out. So in the 1970s, agricultural producers were working together trying to come up with a solution to this resistance and pesticide use problem. And they came up with integrated pest management. And this was used as an economical and environmentally sound practice of pesticide resistance management. That's what it was designed for, is to prevent pesticide resistance, not necessarily kill the insects better, but to be able to avoid them becoming resistant to the insecticides that were available. Okay, now applied IPM in agriculture is a series of steps. And realize that agricultural producers know their business because this is their livelihood. So they know how this goes on. So what they do typically, and that's still being done the exact same way today as it was in the 1970s, is they'll go out there and scout their crop to identify what pests they have. So that means they'll go out there and actually look in a certain portion of their field and see what kind of pests they have and assess the pest pressure. How many insects are they seeing in this kind of square meters? Okay, then based on experience and the pest information that's been published, they will see if they have a pest level that is at the economic injury level. Okay, and realize IPM in the agricultural environment, they have established these metrics of the economic injury level for every kind of pest on a particular type of crop. And what that means is if you have a certain number of pests in this part of your crop, you can project that if you have that same number of pests throughout your crop there, that you're going to come and lose money due to crop damage during harvest time. Okay, so that's when they decide that it's worthwhile to apply a pesticide. They don't necessarily apply the pesticide first. They go out there, actually see how many pests they have, what time it is relative to the time they're going to harvest their crop, and see if they fit the economic injury level or not. Now, they can also have the economic threshold level. So instead of going out there in June and looking at the number of pests, they might go out in April, see how many pests they have, and then make a decision about whether they have enough pests that are going to double, triple, or quadruple their populations come harvest time and cause damage. So they have these two metrics, the economic injury level. Okay, I have this many right now, so that's going to cause me to lose money. Or the economic threshold level, well, I have this many pests right now, so come harvest time, if I don't do something about it, I'm going to have this many pests, and then that'll cause me to lose money. And then they're going to go and do a pesticide application. Okay, now they may scout again after the treatment to see if the pests are now reduced to a manageable level. And again, that phrase, manageable level, is one that is widely used in agriculture. But again, they go out, do this assessment, they have these two metrics, and they see if the pests have been reduced to a manageable level. Well, when it gets to urban IPM, what is a manageable level? You know, humans are unwilling to tolerate even one bed bug, and yet they still want the least expensive treatment. And we do have organizations in the United States, such as the EPA and US HUD Housing, and quite a few of these other government organizations that have an interest in integrated pest management, but they don't really have the true knowledge of what it actually involves. Okay, and typically they're looking for something that's low toxicity or reduced toxicity to be used. And again, with humans, feelings about pests and pesticides in the home can be extremely variable. You know, when I'm out there working in people's homes, I have some people that'll be like, honey, you just do whatever it takes to kill them old bugs. And then I'll go into other homes, excuse me, is that dust going to hurt my dog? You know, things like that. So there's kind of a big difference in how people see or feel about pesticide use. And the scouting or assessment typically that we see farmers do, and certainly the metrics, are completely lost when we're working in the urban environment. That is not something we typically see. So urban IPM, like I said, has sort of morphed into a belief that it's a low toxicity or non-toxic method of pest control that is carried out by a pest control operator, somebody who's licensed and certified. Now, I have to ask you, do apartment managers care about IPM? No, it's not their money they're spending. It's not their home that's infested. And we have for 30 years, I've been hearing this. It's the residents' fault. They don't clean up. If they cleaned up, they wouldn't have these pest problems. And just to give you an example, this is a US HUD contract. This is language from a US HUD housing contract on integrated pest management. And this is from Richmond Public Housing. And what it says in the contract is pesticides, this housing authority requires an integrated pest management approach to pest control and environmentally friendly pest control methods that are not toxic to humans. Well, that's not what IPM is, okay? IPM is a series of steps, but everybody's gotten the idea that it's some sort of environmentally friendly, non-toxic methodology? Well, based on the Food Quality Protection Act of 1996, none of you are allowed to apply anything indoors that has any human toxicity. And so this almost goes without saying. Well, another interesting issue in this same contract is they had products in this housing authority's contract proposal that said, you know, you could use caramates. What they meant was carbamates. Organic phosphates, they meant organophosphates. Both of these chemistries had been banned for indoor use since 1996 for not being essentially environmentally friendly. Okay. So it makes it obvious that the managers of these government facilities really don't know anything about pest control. And yes, they do want to blame everything on the lack of sanitation. And this is a picture I took in one of the units that I work in on a regular basis. So you can see what it looks like. Okay, how did I get on this path to assessment-based pest management? Well, the way I support my laboratory is we do a lot of sponsored research. So MGK or Syngenta might come to us and say, hey, we have a new bait formulation that we want to test and we want to try it out in the field. Do you have some places that you could test this for us? And so we'll go out and work in public housing because they're known to be the most infested, and that's where we can get the most obvious results. So this is a picture of Richmond public housing here where we do a lot of our work. We know that there's major resistance to spray formulation insecticides there because we've been working there for quite a few years, and yet their companies that they hire tend to rely on spray formulations. But when I went there to the management and first started working there, I was asking them about having the resident clean and put away competing food sources and stuff like that because we'd be testing baits. And they said, oh, no, we can't ask the residents to do that because we haven't hired you to do it. You're just doing experiments here. So we couldn't have any resident cleanup. And I thought, oh, my goodness, if we're testing baits, is that going to work? But we went into these locations and you could see that the cockroach populations were just going crazy. You know, here we have a doorway on the left-hand side. That was fairly typical, but look inside this kitchen drawer. Just look at the number of egg cases. And again, 14 to 52 offspring in there. Think of all the females that had to produce those and all their boyfriends that are responsible for that. You know, how many cockroaches are we talking about? And it's not like the resident went and collected every egg case in their house and put it in this kitchen drawer. But this does let you know how long those populations have been there. Okay. And again, if you start looking at the collection of feces, I studied German cockroach feces for my master's and PhD, and you can just see that they are caked onto the hinges on this cabinet that is underneath the sink. And they just have tons of feces that have been there for years. And you go upstairs to some of the closets and you can see the two mothballs here in the picture on the left. And this was pretty much an empty closet there. It didn't have any food sources or anything, but it had plenty of cockroaches. And it was pretty obvious that mothballs really don't do anything for cockroaches. But that picture on the right, all that is cockroach debris that has collected over time underneath all of that newspaper. So these are dead bodies and feces and shed skins. And if you think about it, during the wintertime, people will close up their apartment, turn the heat on. This will dry everything out. And all of these particles become airborne, and that's what the people are breathing on a regular basis. And again, you know, you think about asthma and allergies, number one cause are German cockroaches, especially for inner city children. And you can see exactly where those allergens are coming from. So this is a wonderful picture here. This is the kitchen where the facilities people had decided to take down the cabinetry and replace it. And what you're looking at is the cockroach feces that have accumulated behind the cabinets and the stove and the other appliances for years and years. And I always ask everybody, do you think they're going to clean that? No, they're going to paint right over it. And I love it when I go into one of these apartments and go to touch the light switch and it's all completely white, looks very nice, painted very well, but it has a granular texture because of the cockroach feces that are underneath the paint. But you can think about all of the feces that have accumulated in these locations since 1971. Okay, well, assessment is the basis of integrated pest management. If you think about the farmer going out there and counting the number of insects that are in a particular portion of his field, but, US housing managers do not understand integrated pest management. So there's no assessment of building infestation levels ever. And certainly years and years go by and they've never even looked. And the managers often have no idea their units are so infested and will even avoid going into them. Management doesn't require records indicating fewer cockroaches after treatment than before from their pest control companies. And I think this is something that needs to change in the future. And long-term pest issues have been continuously blamed on the residents. And well, the resident doesn't clean up. That's why we don't get rid of the roaches. Instead of resistance to spray formulation insecticides, which may really be one of the major causes. Well, part of the problem is this policy they have of going with the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. So since they have to go with the lowest bidder, the pest control technician does not have the time to do any kind of assessment of the population size. They basically have to get in the door, make an application, and get out. And so spray applications are the primary treatment, and therefore US HUD Housing is paying for pesticide application, not pest control. Realize that the two are not the same thing. I want all of you to think about that. Pesticide application only and pest control are two different things. So just to give you an example of what this lowest responsive and responsible bidder situation comes out to is that these are cockroach populations that were under a pest control contract, and Richmond, it's called Richmond Redevelopment and Housing Authority, paid $6 a door in 2010 for what they called pest control, but then paid $5.44 a door in 2020. Can you think of any other situation in the world where that would be the business, where that kind of thing could happen? And I just want to show you some of the pictures of the infestations. One of these housing communities had all of their tile within the bathroom, within the shower area, was covered with a new laminate, and it didn't adhere very well. And the cockroaches decided now they were going to live in the shower. So everybody got to shower with hundreds of cockroaches every day. Okay, again, what was consistently given as the reason for these persistent infestations was the lack of sanitation on the part of the resident. And yes, these are pictures that I took in the different sites, and you can see we put out a sticky trap on the top of the sink there. You can see that up by where the sink the sink nozzles are and stuff, but you can see the amount of food that was available for the cockroaches that were there. And this is a stove. This is fairly typical of the stoves that you see in public housing. A lot of grease buildup that has not been cleaned off, and you can see that back skillet still has food in it. This house had some young ladies living in it who left during our treatment, but they left all this food sitting out for the cockroaches. And this is one of the most infested units that we worked in, but they were comfortable with leaving the food just sitting out there. So how we got started on this process to assessment-based pest management, again, is I was doing sponsored research, testing baits. And one of the things we were required to do to show whether the baits worked or not was to go into these apartment units and put traps out. We usually put 3 traps per unit, one above the sink, one below the sink, and one behind the toilet. And so they're labeled A for above the sink, B for below the sink, and C for behind the commode, basically. And we return the next day to pick up the traps and count the roaches. And then that lets us know that one apartment is more infested than another, and then have some sense of what the cockroach populations are. So if you take a look at this picture, this was taken in June. And one of the things I want to point out to you, first of all, how many cockroaches are on this one trap? And this is overnight trap catch. And realize that the German cockroach populations double, triple, and quadruple during the summer months. And you can see how many immature cockroaches are in this trap, filling it up. And then the adult cockroaches have kind of climbed over the top of them to get to that attractant pellet back when we used to use those. And there's over 1,300 cockroaches in this one trap. And we're putting out 3 traps only overnight. So you can imagine how many cockroaches were in this particular unit. Okay, our baiting protocol when we were testing these baits is we would find the most infested units using this trapping methods, and then all of those units would get 30 grams of bait on day 1. That's an entire tube. Okay. And then we would put traps out again on day 3, day 7, and then come back on day 14 and evaluate the trap catch again. So we do overnight trap catch each time. And if the trap catch was greater than 500 cockroaches in all 3 traps, then we would put out an additional 2 tubes of bait. If the trap catch was greater than 100, they got 1 tube. If it was 50 to 100, they got half a tube. And if it was less than 50, they got a quarter of a tube, or 7.5 grams of bait. Well, one of the things we found out when we were trying to put the bait out in these little droplets is it took forever. How do you put out 30 grams of bait if you've got to put them out in these quarter of a dime size droplets? Well, you think about technicians doing this, time is money. And if your break even cost as a company is about $1.50 per minute, then the time constraints keep the technician from applying enough bait. Okay. So I just want you to take a look at that picture on the right. There's this quarter of the dime size application we're making there. And how do you apply 30 grams and not take all day? Notice that there's 7 cockroaches in that picture. And if they all eat that one droplet of bait, how many of those droplets do we need to really address that population? And that could take a lot of time to get all that put out. Well, we tried to find a way of applying multiple grams of bait quickly. And it just so happened that one night I decided, oh, hey, I'll go out and buy some wax paper and we'll make little containers for the bait so that we can put more bait out. So I ended up buying grandma's cut right wax paper and then cutting it into 2-inch by 2-inch squares, folding it on the diagonal, and then just running a straight line of bait down that crease. And on the right-hand side, you can see Morgan, my technician, preparing the bait tacos that we started calling them in one of the housing units that we were working in. So again, cut right wax paper, cut into squares, and then we would mark our bait tubes so we could see what, a whole tube where the bait ended inside the tube. That would be the 30 grams, half a tube, 15 grams, quarter of a tube, 7.5 grams. So we could kind of monitor when we were making the tacos how much we had applied into the tacos. And again, here you can see the tacos placed in cracks and crevices, just like the label requires, and the cockroaches coming right over to have a bite of the taco. And one of the advantages we discovered right away, oh, okay, here we have question 2. Let me give you a chance for that. And you tell me when to start again.
Yeah, you can just take a 10-second break. All right, you can begin again.
Okay. So one of the advantages of using these tacos is it allowed us to put out a lot of bait quickly. Okay. And we can put them in locations that we didn't contaminate because they were in the tacos. So here you can see all of these housing units have these plumbing penetrations that go through the walls and things like that. So there's a lot of pipes, and we were able to put tacos up there. And then people had stacks of mail. That was really common. So stacks of mail, and we'd have cockroaches living in between the individual envelopes. Well, you can't spray those, you can't put bait in there, but we can put the tacos in between, and the cockroaches would come and start eating them. And they really like these baits in this wax paper. That was amazing. They chewed all the way through there, and it was just an accident that we found this out. And I went and showed this picture to one of the managers, and this was on top of a refrigerator. And you can see that we have what, 3 bait tacos that you can see really well. There's one close to that black tray, but there was also cooked rice that was up there in that tray. And you could see the cockroaches started running out and feeding on those tacos almost immediately. Now, I showed this to the manager, and the manager asked me, yeah, but how long did you have to wait and come back and take this picture? I'm like, we hadn't even left yet. We're still putting the tacos out, and the roaches were coming right over to them. So these populations can be controlled, we found out. We tested a variety of different bait products just because it so happened that we were doing these studies. So Advion, Maxforce Magnum, Alpine, Vendetta, you notice they all have different active ingredients. But again, we're going to have to pay more attention to the inert ingredients as well. And here you could see we could put out droplets of bait and the cockroaches were attracted to them. But in one study we were doing, where we were using Maxforce Magnum and Advion, and I think we were working for Syngenta, and they had 3 other test bait formulations, so they didn't have names or anything, and we went and tried them in 6 apartment units each for each bait formulation. And you can see we went and looked at the trap catch, called that trap catch 100% on day 0. And for each of those bait formulations, you can see we put the traps in on day 3, and we had a huge drop in overnight trap catch even by day 3 by putting those tacos out. And that was for all of the bait formulations, ranged from about 30% to 20%, so about 70% to 80% decline. Then you can see the traps we put out on day 7. Day 14, it stayed about the same, but day 14 now is when we put out the 60 grams, the 30 grams. And you can see that they dropped, the populations dropped by day 30, and by day 60, we had a 90 to 98% reduction for all of the bait formulations we tested. Now, if you look at that blue line there, that was our controls. And you can see the populations in the control units went down as well because of the traps. But on day 14, one lady out of our 6 units for controls decided to let off a bug bomb. And that did drop the average trap catch number. But notice by day 30, that number had bounced right back up. So the trapping was doing something for them and their contract pest control operator, but it didn't work nearly as well as the baits. And they still had, 70% of what they had begun with. Okay, bait in the wax paper. I presented this method to a lot of different pest management companies, at pest management meetings, at scientific meetings, and housing meetings all over the planet. I have a lot of international colleagues as well. And US HUD actually took notice and asked me to write them a model pest management contract with language for their facilities, which I did do. This was Richmond Public Housing. And I just want to point out Ray Johnson in 2015, apparently he wasn't as crazy about Mexican food, so he had us making, he called it the bait cannoli, but that was something his company had adopted as well at that time. So anyway, I wrote a proposal to US HUD and Cornell University to try and work at 3 sites to see if this was a methodology that really could be useful for pest control. Because up until then, we'd been doing sponsored research for chemical companies, just trying out different baits. And we wanted to see if this method was something that should be used out in the field. So we started working at 3 different housing authorities. On the bottom left, there's Richmond Housing, of course, and the top right, that's Hopewell Housing, that's also here in Virginia, and then the bottom right is Rocky Mount, North Carolina. Now, each of these housing authorities had different pest control contracts with different companies. They were paying 3 different prices, and they had 3 different treatment protocols that were being used. And we went in there and did overnight trapping in each of these facilities, each of these communities, and had 60 units at each site. And you can see on the left here, we're putting out trap A for above the sink. And here I am picking up trap B the next morning. And you can see all the cockroaches in it, and then placing trap C behind the commode there. And our inspections of these different locations first revealed large numbers of German cockroaches. And again, each of these communities were under different contracts with different pest control companies, and yet the cockroaches were just prolific. Why was that? Well, here's the thing. Management, when I had a meeting with everybody, thinks they're paying for the product. They don't think anything about technician time, which is interesting because if they have electricians come in or plumbers come in, they know they pay a labor cost, but they don't even think about that for pest control. And realize too that our sprays are really inexpensive if that is what is being used. So if you buy one of these containers of Demand or Psychic or Tempo or whatever, you'll pay about $30 for 20 gallons. And that comes out to about 128 ounces in a gallon. And then typically what we saw applied in these units was about 11 ounces of formulated product. Well, once they were formulated and then 11 ounces, the price of the actual spray that was being applied ranged from 3 cents to 12 cents per unit. But again, everybody thinks the answer is spray and gave no credit to the technician. And they also know nothing about resistance. So they think, oh, well, you got to spray. You're not spraying enough. You need to spray more. And realize too that these sprays no longer will kill a lot of these cockroaches because they're so resistant, but it may make them sick. And if they're sick, they don't feel like eating bait. But we even have situations with these cockroaches that have really high enzymatic activity in their bodies that help them to detoxify insecticides. So they may go down, look like they're passed out, and get up 4 hours later and shake it off, but then they don't feel like eating. So putting spray and bait together, that seemed to be kind of useless. And once again, in this second, this true experiment here, we were asking, how come these cockroach populations are so bad? And the management and the pest control company, contract pest control company, all said the same thing. Well, the resident doesn't clean up. That's what the problem is. And I love this picture. This is one of the kitchens, and yes, there's plates and food and things like that all over the floor, but there's also a broom and a rake. And this is the upstairs hallway in between the bedrooms and the bathrooms and one of the closets and things. And you can see the bag of chips and stuff like that. So there's plenty of debris and things like that. This place, oh my goodness. This is where we were monitoring, and this place had a problem with their bathtub, so the water did not drain, and we were coming back there every month, and I had somebody from the housing facilities with me every month, but they didn't do anything about it. And I'm like, how does anybody take a bath in there or take a shower? Okay, and again, here's trap C behind the toilet, and I just want you to notice all the cockroach activity. I had this on a video, but I didn't want to use the video on here because it might take too long. But I mean, they were just crawling all over the place. And this is when Ben Carson was the head of US HUD. And he had just said that poverty was a state of mind. And I'm like, gosh, I'd love to have him come sit on this toilet and see if cockroaches are a state of mind, because this is how these poor people are having to live. And here, sanitation in the kitchen, I just want to point out, this was actually a very clean kitchen. It just had a ton of stuff. And one of the advantages of not asking the resident to do anything, doing any cleaning or what have you, is that we could put baked tacos into all the cracks and crevices that existed here. And that made it even easier to put more bait out, but they didn't have to clean anything and they didn't have any competing food sources. So that was just about perfect. Now, here you can see where the resident has done their own cockroach control. They had used baits, used it as caulk, basically, but that didn't seem to, that might have been there since 1998, and this stuff was no longer working or functional anymore. But it was typical to go into these homes and see these large quantities of different sprays they kept. Now, I don't know if the snap punch kills cockroaches at all, but you would think people would learn that after they'd used the first 2 cans of sprays and still had a zillion cockroaches afterwards, that these sprays were just not working for them. Well, I got to work with some great people at each of these housing authorities, and you can see we put the traps out A, B, and C, and in the middle there, you can see each unit is listed and the trap catch listed for units A, B, and C, and then how much bait we put out based on the trap catch. So it might be a little bit hard to see it, but if you see unit 1542 Coulter, that's the one on the top. We caught 3 in trap A, 4 in trap B, 3 in trap C. And if you look at the one that was right next door, 1540 Coulter, that's one of my favorite units, 282, 254, 270. And we had to apply the 30 grams in that one. But here you can see I was very excited about the trap catch. Roy was very excited about the trap catch, but Shamika, who's standing behind me, was not as excited as I was. Okay, so we wanted to provide managers with documentation of what we had caught in there. And it's, we can't expect that a pest control company or a pest control technician would have time to count the trap catch. But you could look at all 3 traps together, take a photograph of it for records, and be able to label it as high, medium, or low. And of course, we use that trap catch to determine the amount of bait to be applied. Okay, and that was very important. So if you had something that looked like this, where you had A, B, and C, and, we counted the numbers in each of these traps. So you see 85, 276, 197, but you could kind of look at that and go, that's kind of a medium or high, and that would determine the amount of bait you would apply. So here, for the lows, if we had to 1 to 50 cockroaches, and you can see what the 3 traps look like when they have a low level of infestation, then they'd get a quarter of a tube. 50 to 100, they'd get a half a tube. Then 100, they would get 1 tube. If they had more than 500, then they would get 2 tubes. And you can tell that you can look at the trap catch and determine how much they are going to get. So treatment was based on assessment. This again was a study that we were using. So if we had homes that only had 0 to 24 cockroaches, we called them controls. But if we had 25 to 74 for the first treatment, we gave them 7.5 grams. If they had 75 to 249, we gave them 15 grams or half a tube. If they had more than 250, then we gave them a whole tube. And we used Advion Evolution in North Carolina, and we used Vendetta Nitro in Hopewell, Virginia, and we used Max Force Magnum in Richmond, Virginia, because that is the product that their company was currently using, and it didn't seem to be working. And so we wanted to see if there was a problem with the Max Force Magnum or if it was just not enough bait was being put out. And you can see Mark there with his overnight trap catch. That's a lot of cockroaches he has in that one trap. Okay, so this is just so you get some perspective. This is what half a tube of bait looks like made in tacos. These are all about half a gram or so in each taco. This is what 30 grams of bait or 1 whole tube typically looks like. Okay, and then we would monitor again on day 14 and bait according to the trap count, just like we had before. But this time on day 14, if the trap catch was greater than 500, we put out 60 grams. If it was 100 or greater than 30 grams, 50 to 100, half a tube of bait or 15 grams. If it was 1 to 50 cockroaches, then we'd put out a quarter of a tube of bait or 7.5 grams. And here's what 60 grams. of bait looks like. So make sure you have plenty. And again, this is Unit 1540 Coulter that was marvelously infested, and had to make 2 sets of tacos here. And what was interesting, though, is you can see in these pictures as we are making the bait tacos that we have cockroaches coming and running to the bait and feeding on it even before we put it out. So you can see the 2 on those 2 middle tacos that are on the left hand side, and one little tiny cockroach on the right hand side eating at one of the tacos. And it didn't matter what bait formulation it was, they liked them all. And we made sure that we rotated every 90 days because of bait aversion and resistance. We wanted to make sure that didn't happen. Now, one of the things that was very important, though, is you have to be willing to get up on top of countertops and things like that to access different locations. And that's so you can get access to all the roaches. Notice all these pipes going through the wall, and these were going to the apartments next door, and they had these escutcheon plates around the pipes that had just pulled away because years had gone by. And this was a very good place to put all these bait tacos so that you didn't have to worry about the ones that were in between the 2 units. You could feed them right there and not have them necessarily cross over into another unit. And the results, they ate it up. They seemed to love the baits. And again, it didn't matter what formulation we were using because we were using different bait formulations in each of these housing authorities, and then we switched every 90 days. And the residents were very impressed with this too. One thing that was very important is we had to talk to the resident and ask them not to apply their own spray. And some of them were like, oh, I have to, I can't stand it. And then we ended up having to tell them, okay, how about for 3 days? Don't spray anything. And after that, you can do whatever you want, but we want them to eat the bait. And usually they had no problem with that whatsoever. So it's important that you talk to the resident. Now, one of the advantages of using these bait tacos, since we aren't spraying anything, we didn't need the resident to leave. And that was even better because we were able to tell them what we were doing while we were doing it. And we didn't ask them to clean or anything, and we're putting all the tacos around, and we're able to ask them not to apply their own spray because they were present right there with us. And believe me, they were so happy to see these results. And I think it's important that you show them the eaten tacos as well. Okay, one of the things though that we realized is, okay, after we have all these dead cockroaches all over the place, what a mess. Well, now is the time to vacuum. We don't want to vacuum before because we don't want to scare the cockroaches. We want them calm and happy and hungry, and then we come and bring them treats. But then when you have all these dead bodies, that's the time to get rid of them. So I was showing the maintenance guys all the places we needed to vacuum. And I want to point out on the left there, you can see that nylon stocking. That is a basically just a knee-high stocking that we put down the hose of the vacuum and then put the attachment on the top so everything we suck up goes into the nylon stocking instead of like contaminating the vacuum itself. And you can see that's what Nathan's showing us there. And I was able to get up on top of all these counters and things. And because of that, the other guys who were working with me were willing to get up on the counters as well and do the vacuuming. And here you can see everything that we sucked up in that nylon stocking. And now we can just pull that out of the vacuum, tie it in a knot, and throw it away. And we don't have to clean out the vacuum afterwards. Okay, so what were our results? Realize we had to start this study in June, which is the most difficult time of year, again, because the cockroaches are doubling, tripling, and quadrupling their populations. And this is at the Richmond Rehabilitation and Housing Authority. And you can see we have the black line for the high level infestations, the dark gray dashed line for medium level infestations, and the light gray with the dots for the low level. And if you go up to the top, You can see that we used Maxforce Magnum for the first 90 days, then we switched to OptiGuard Cockroach, then we switched to Vendetta Nitro, then we switched to Advion Evolution. And we did this study starting in June and going through the following September. So you can see that we got the populations pretty much in decline, where we had almost eliminated for all three, high, medium, and low, on day 180 using these gel bait applications in December. Okay. And once the populations were down for the high and the medium, they didn't really come back up through the summer at all. And then by the following September, when the study ended, we had a 90% reduction in the high level and a 97% reduction in the medium. Now, over that time, the average amount of bait received for the heavy infestations was 200 grams in each apartment. Think about that. Have you ever applied 200 grams in a single apartment? Okay, this was over a year. It was 11 months, or what, 13 months? Mediums received 107.9 grams, so 108 grams, and the lights received about 86 grams. Now, notice the light infestations kind of went up, but you can see in my note there on the right, it says, note that 5 of the 7 low-level infestation units had 100% elimination, 5 of the 7. However, 2 of the 7 low-level units had a 480% increase. And what we mean by that is that we had trap catch in these low-level infestations of 2 that went up to 9. Okay, so that's that 480% increase. And come to find out, in both of those units, the resident had moved out and new residents had moved in from a neighboring apartment unit. And apparently they had brought some cockroaches with them. But I'm completely confident we would be able to get rid of them if we just started baiting those cockroaches out again. Okay, so that's Richmond housing. If we look at Hopewell housing, we had better luck. Okay, we started using Vendetta Nitro when we first started. Then we switched to OptiGuard Cockroach, then Maxforce Magnum, then Advion Evolution. And across all three, the high, mediums, and lows, we had a 99% reduction. And you can see with the heavy, that black line, we pretty much had them eliminated by October, November. And once they were eliminated, they never came back in these units. So again, it's hard for us to say that anybody, oh, well, they're coming from next door. Well, apparently once we got rid of them, without any resident cleaning, they were gone. And if you notice from the medium infestations, we pretty much eliminated those populations by day 270. So December, January, February, the following March, we had eliminated them and they didn't come back through the following September. And again, we still had to battle the low-level infestations. And, you see the same thing with bedbugs and cockroaches. Those last onesie-twosies were the most challenging to get rid of. Now, in this location, the heavies received an average of 82.5 grams. Medium were much more challenging at 147.5 grams. So we had to keep baiting those regularly. And then the lights, 39 grams. Well, we had the best luck in Rocky Mount. So if you look at the heavy, medium, and light infestations, we were able to eliminate the cockroaches in each of these sets of apartment units, and they never came back. And here's the thing, this is no resident cleaning at all. Heavy infestations got 102.5 grams, medium 91.1, light 34.6. And it just so happens Syngenta was giving us some funding for this. So we went back and forth between OptiGuard Cockroach and Advion Evolution. So every 3 months, but I do recommend using additional bait formulations. And the reason for that is bait aversion and insecticide resistance. We don't want that happening with baits because what else will we have to use then?
Dini, we got 5 minutes.
Okay. So this was a 390-day cockroach study where we were monitoring and baiting every 30 days, except for that first month. We did it every 14 days there. And we rotated the bait formulations also every 90 days to avoid bait aversion. And that's a big deal. So please be careful of that. We then vacuumed to remove the dead bodies. But again, what's really important, no resident cleaning or preparation, because we don't want to disturb the cockroaches and disrupt them and move them around right before we come in there to feed them snacks. And it's very important to communicate this to the resident as well. So I want to say too, because the populations don't double, triple, and quadruple during the winter months would be the ideal time for major cockroach elimination efforts. Now, we weren't able to do that because they wouldn't let us, but we didn't see any summer population rebounds when we got rid of these populations. That was amazing. If they were eliminated, they were gone. So if you could get rid of them during the winter months, that would be best, and then they wouldn't show up during the summer. Now, the bait amount was determined by the overnight trap catch. So we have a method that tells us exactly how much bait we need to put out. We don't guess how much bait to put out, okay? And we applied more bait in a single unit than had ever been applied before. It ranged between 34 grams to 200 grams over this 390-day period. One thing I want to point out in the pictures on the left here, I used to cut all these 2-inch by 2-inch squares, but a friend of mine actually gave me this quilt cutting device where you can cut squares that people use to sew and make quilts. And you can actually rack the wax paper around that, run it through this machine, and it cuts, you know, hundreds of these squares for you instantly. So that would save some time too. Okay, average cost and labor time. We looked at how long it took to get in the door. And regardless of whether it was high, medium, or low infestation or zero trap catch, getting in the door took about a minute. So think about that as far as your cost at $1.50 per minute. Placing the traps took about a minute as well, whether it was high, medium, low. Entry the next day, it took about a minute to get in there. Then pick up the traps and documenting, that's picking the traps up, taking pictures of them, took about an average of 2 minutes to do that. Now, placing the bait tacos, that depended on the infestation size. So high infestations took over 14 minutes, mediums about 5 minutes, lows about 2.5 minutes, and the zero trap catch, because we didn't do any baiting or anything like that, no taco placement, that was zero. Now our low line traps were 81 cents a piece, that's $2.43. And if you're applying bait, if you're applying a whole tube, that's $6, half a tube, $3, and a quarter of a tube, $1.50. So if you look at the prices of treating the high level units, which are going to be reduced over time, so it gets cheaper for you each time, the high level units on average, with the cost of the labor at $1.50 per minute, the 3 traps and the bait, was about $39.28 to treat the high levels. And then medium levels, $20. Low levels, $15. Even zero trap catch was $8 because you're putting the traps in, taking them out. But you can reuse those traps. We certainly did. But the time it takes the human to get in and get out, that is the cost. So keep that in mind. That's what pest control costs. Okay, why doesn't the pest control industry have the same image as plumbers and technicians? Why have we told multi-unit housing managers that pest control costs $5 a door? How do we change this image? We have to quit underselling our work. We do not need resident cooperation. We need to be paid for our time. And I have to ask each of you, are you in the pesticide application business or the pest control business? Now, pest management professionals have to assess so that management can be informed what's in their units, whether they want to know it or not. And this marriage to spray has led to cockroach resistance, but managers think you must spray. This has got to change. We've got to change that image. Assessment needs to be the basis of urban IPM. And I suggest putting assessment-based pest management so people understand, lay people understand something's going to be assessed. No more wasting time guessing how much to apply. We use the numbers. And failure to control the cockroaches can no longer be blamed on the residents. We have the power. we can totally eliminate these infestations. And take a look at these two places. You know, here are places, this is the sanitation level, and yet we had gotten the cockroach trap catch down to absolute zero month after month with no resident cleaning. So just keep that in mind. And I'll take any questions if anybody's got any.
Yeah, we have a question. It says, for customers who really have poor sanitation and could not get help, what's your recommendation on the control methods? I think you answered that during your presentation.
Yes,
I,
yes.
I really think you did multiple times on that one, but they posted it. I was going to read it.
Yeah, no, it literally, we have done this study now multiple times. This is from one of the studies. We've done it again, but we've been able to show with no resident cleaning whatsoever. If we're going in there and putting enough bait, apparently the cockroaches like this bait better than they like the nasty food that's laying around. And we were able to eliminate them.
Yeah. Next one is wax paper the best choice for the bait taco? What about using regular printing paper instead?
Yeah, there's something about that cut right wax paper that's used for baking that seems to work as an attractant. Remember I told you about beta version where we had that little small instar that went from one taco to another? And so it was the wax paper that was attracting the cockroach. There's something about it, something about the smell. Maybe that's what it is. You know, it's used for baking, so maybe it's made to smell good. Other people have tried other papers and I've not seen it work as well.
Let me see. What's the next one?
And it's 99 cents a roll. That's why I got it to begin with. It's cheap.
Baiting with children and pets in the units.
Yes, bait the children also.
I agree.
No, the children, we used to put baits in straws, and that became a problem because that was attractive to children. The children don't seem to be interested in the wax paper. And again, we've got to put them in cracks and crevices like the label requires. So typically we're not putting them where children are going to bother them, the underneath the sink, above the sink, and things like that. And I haven't seen pets show any interest, and there was plenty of pets in these locations as well.
I got another one. What is your opinion on WSGs for roaches?
WSGs, the soluble
Wettable-
granulars and
Yeah.
stuff. It's fine. It's just we don't seem to attract the roaches quite the same way. They don't come running to it like I showed you pictures of. Okay. That may work, and we are going to be testing some stuff out in the field. But again, if you're applying something like that, like we have some dust bait formulations that companies want us to test, I worry that we're going to ask the resident to do some cleaning. And that has failed us utterly for 30 years. So the big advantage of this is not having to ask the resident to clean. So you might want to be able to put those WSGs in locations where you can put them. But again, let's avoid asking the resident to do something, because I think we'll just be disappointed.
Got a whole bunch of questions. I'm just trying to feed the ones that I think are really good. I mean, not that they're all good questions, but we don't have time for all.
Well, anybody can feel free to contact me, and ask.
I got one here. Are we giving up on sanitation?
Well, I would say the sanitation during my entire career, which started in 1991, okay, when I was going to grad school and started working in public housing, the sanitation has not changed one bit. And I think for German cockroach control in particular, we can ask the residents to clean, but it just won't happen. And we found out that having the cockroaches being calm and everything, not, because the residents will clean at the last minute if they do any cleaning at all. And that'll disturb them right before we want to feed them. So I'd say relying on the resident to make a contribution has never paid off for us. So we need to be able to do it without any resident help. Now, is that going to work for bed bugs? No. But for cockroaches, we need a different path.
I got one right here, why the paper at all? If that much gel can be applied on paper, why not directly into the crack and crevices? But I know why you're saying it, because we can pick it up and remove it. If you leave it in the cracks and crevices, it's never gonna be removed, it's gonna get hard and it's gonna look disgusting.
Right. And also, you know, if people can contaminate it and stuff like that. The wax paper is an attractant, and it also seems to keep it cleaner. And if we can bring the cockroaches right over to the tacos from the minute we get there, that is really an advantage. There's something about that wax paper that they seem to like. I don't know what.
That's all the questions that we'll be able to do today, so we can get everybody back on the road. If anybody else has further questions, you can email the doctor herself on that. It was a phenomenal information series you gave us today. I really appreciate it.